The U.S. is home to major tech giants Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft. Together, these so-called Big Five make up 22% of the entire S&P 500. Apple alone reached a $2 trillion market cap in August 2020. Microsoft eclipsed the threshold in June 2021. That's more than the GDP of countries like South Korea, Russia, Canada, and Brazil. The year of the pandemic only boosted profits across U.S. big tech as more people communicated, shopped, watched, worked, and searched all online. But in the background, there's a drumbeat for more regulation of these tech giants with unparalleled market power. Many legislators argue there's now less competition and consumer choice.
Each of them engages in activity which is very problematic and significantly anti-competitive and an abuse of their power.
There aren't really viable competitors right now to Facebook. There aren't really viable competitors to Google, and that's a big problem.
Big tech is now more powerful than ever. They are more powerful economically, they are more powerful socially, and they are more powerful politically. We need to break up big tech.
But as the song goes, breaking up is hard to do. Hard decisions are what lie ahead for lawmakers, litigators, the judicial system, and even the CEOs of these companies, some of whom maintain they can self-regulate. But putting trust in U.S. tech giants to monitor themselves is a tall order, as the technology they make is used in nearly every aspect of our lives, and that's a lot of power. So when it comes to the safety of consumers, industries, and even governments, it may just be time to draw lines in the sand. Red lines. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, part of the fertile Bay Area that's home to Silicon Valley and some of the biggest tech companies in the world, including Google, Apple, Facebook, Netflix, Twitter, and Uber. This is the global center for high technology and innovation, companies born in a spirit of both cooperation and competition.
When people are connected, we can just do some great things.
I don't think any of us would have had the audacity to predict it would grow as fast as it has.
For us, it's not about being first, it's about being the best.
But being the best can run into complications. When does the drive toward innovation and scale actually stifle competition? Over the next half hour, we'll talk about what happens when big tech goes unchecked, who's suing whom, and the consequences of litigation and legislation.
Some people say that the Googles of the world, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, are too powerful. They have so much power in our economy that it's not healthy. What is your response to the view that the technology companies are becoming so dominant in our economy that it's not healthy?
We are very mindful of the fact that with the scale of these companies comes scrutiny, and that it's incumbent on us to engage with regulators and help them understand what is it that we're doing that is of benefit, how are we providing better services at lower costs, which is really indicative of the competitive nature of the world in which we operate.
I don't think big by itself is bad, but competition is good, and every business, in particular the businesses that are large and have high scale, the unintended consequences of your scale cannot be dealt after the fact. They need to be dealt while you're scaling.
Scaling. It's something Silicon Valley does well and fast, but it's not the first time the U.S. has witnessed such corporate enormity that falls under scrutiny. Here's a look back at some of the biggest antitrust cases in U.S. history. John D. Rockefeller was a young but enterprising businessman from a poor family who found his way into the Ohio oil business during the Civil War. By 1870, he and his partners had turned Standard Oil into the largest refinery business in Cleveland. Over the next few decades, that one oil company became an empire, controlling up to 95% of refining across America. Rockefeller combining producers, refineries, and marketers into a trust that by 1906 caught the scrutiny of the U.S. government. Regulators sued the Standard Oil Corporation under the Sherman Antitrust Act. Within 5 years, the firm was ordered to sell off its major holdings, 33 companies in all. The resulting companies have since been renamed, and you'll recognize some of their more recent monikers, including Exxon, Chevron, and British Petroleum. Breakups also shaped the telecom industry. In 1974, the U.S. sued to break up AT&T, calling for the divestment of its subsidiary, Western Electric. At the time, Ma Bell serviced up to 85% of U.S. telephone lines, while most of the telephone equipment used was produced by Western Electric. Rather than lose the antitrust case, AT&T proposed an alternative, a self-imposed breakup. The company officially broke up in 1984. The result? 7 independent regional holding companies, or Baby Bells, giving consumers access to more choices and lower prices for long-distance service and phones. Companies like Bell Atlantic, Bell South, and US West emerged. Then there's the longest-running monopoly war in the history of the United States, the antitrust case against Microsoft. In 1998, the Department of Justice and attorneys general of 20 different states sued Microsoft, claiming its bundling of programs like Internet Explorer into its Windows operating system was monopolistic. The government accused Microsoft of making it difficult for consumers to install competing software like Netscape on their computers. Microsoft lost the case, with the presiding judge ruling the company violated the Sherman Antitrust Act and calling for Microsoft to divide the company in half, the operating system on one side and the software arm on the other. Microsoft appealed the decision, and the court overturned the earlier judge's ruling, ultimately leading to a 2001 settlement between Microsoft and the DOJ. The company would not need to break up, but it would be required to share computing interfaces with other companies. Microsoft agreed to abide by a consent decree through 2011, barring it from entering into Windows agreements that excluded competitors from new PCs. The Justice Department says that agreement leveled the playing field, making way for the rise of Apple and Google, and now a new generation of tech titans. Fast forward to now, and you have a variety of legal cases and legislative calls for reform against current big tech companies. Echoes of the Microsoft case can be seen in a Justice Department lawsuit against Google. Amazon and Apple are both caught up in the antitrust action playing out in courts. And in the court of public opinion, the House Judiciary Committee recently cleared a handful of antitrust bills targeting big tech. Minnesota Democrat U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar wants to modify laws regulating mergers and acquisitions to block certain anti-competitive conduct by larger firms.
I start this way. We've got some great products that are out there, and no one wants to get rid of them, whether it's Fitbits, whether it's iPhones, whether it is being able to order your groceries online. So let's start with that. And these companies have done very well. I am pleased that they've been successful and employed a bunch of Americans. But at the same time, our country has always rejuvenated capitalism. We've always said, okay, these are good products like we did with AT&T. But at some point, if there's no competition, these companies are allowed to become these monopolistic, dominant providers. And in the case of AT&T, no one wanted to destroy AT&T. They just wanted to make sure that new competitors can develop, like at the time MCI. It brought long distance rates down. We got the cell phone market to go from one big cell phone that fit in like Gordon Gekko's briefcase in that old movie Wall Street to where we are today. I think we need to look at it the same way. You have got situations where you'll have gateway companies that dominate so that they can literally tell people who want to advertise on them, in the case of Google or Facebook, look, I'm sorry, we're going to charge you for that. We just had a big story on app stores with Apple and Google and found out that they're charging Spotify or Match.com 30% of their revenues that come in, but they don't charge it to other big companies. They get to pick. I just don't think that's how a competitive marketplace works. So I look at it as, I love capitalism, but I always believe that you need to put some guards around it when it comes to ensuring capitalism works. And by the way, I'm not alone in this. Adam Smith, the godfather of capitalism and theory related to economics that our founding fathers subscribed to, he said the same thing. He said, yes, we want to have capitalism, but always watch out for what he called the standing armies of monopolies. That's why we have the Sherman Act. That's why we have the Clayton Act. And we need to be as sophisticated as the companies and the CEOs that run them when it comes to making sure we're fostering new entrants in the market.
That was U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar. The congressman who represents Silicon Valley's 17th District, Representative Ro Khanna, says he thinks her proposed bill will get traction in both chambers.
Well, I like Amy Klobuchar's bill, which says if you're a big merger over $5 billion, then it default should have to be reviewed, and you should have to prove that it's not anti-competitive. I'm more concerned about the smaller mergers. I mean, if you're a 50 million or 100 million acquisition, a lot of times those startups have a strategy of wanting to be acquired by a bigger company, and we don't want to squelch those startups from coming on board, nor do we want all of that to go in-house where we actually have even more concentration. So I think it has to be a balanced approach. I think Senator Klobuchar's legislation is a very good start.
Now, it seems like both Republicans and Democrats want action taken on big tech, but for very different reasons. Democrats want more moderation. Republicans are crying free speech. Is Congress a bigger impediment to tech regulation than the tech companies themselves?
It's a great point. Actually, I think a lot of the tech companies want regulation. They don't want to be making the decisions about what to take down and what to leave up. But you're absolutely right. The Democrats say, well, how can you keep some of that content up on these sites? It's inflaming hate. It's inflaming violence. The conservatives often say, no, 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 don't take anything down. And so these tech companies are getting mixed signals. What we need to do is put the politics aside, make sure we can have some basic guidelines for what type of content should be removed and what type of regulations could be effective. And until we do that, I think you're still going to have the internet be the Wild West, where Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg get to decide the rules. I don't think that's how we ought to operate.
That was Representative Ro Khanna of California's 17th District. Coming up on this Bloomberg Special Report, Red Lines, the U.S. and big tech, we'll break down some of the legal cases lobbed against tech giants. California Attorney General Rob Bonta sets his sights early on Facebook, but says all of big tech must be held in the same legal standard. This is Bloomberg.
They're not bad because they're big. They're not bad because they're successful. They're not bad because they're powerful. They're bad if they violate the law and if they hurt consumers.
When it comes to the complex issues around antitrust enforcement against U.S. technology companies, a good place to start is with Microsoft. In 1998, the U.S. Justice Department filed suit against the company, alleging it had violated parts of the Sherman Antitrust Act. The central issue was whether Microsoft, which had more than 90% share of the market for operating systems, was allowed to bundle its flagship Internet Explorer web browser software with Windows, thereby restricting competing web browsers like Netscape Navigator. Microsoft argued that bundling was the result of innovation, which was echoed by CEO at the time, Bill Gates, to Congress. The judge decided that Microsoft's dominance did constitute a monopoly, but when appealed, the ruling was eventually overturned. In the end, the DOJ settled with Microsoft, but the company's once dominant position in the tech industry was eclipsed by upstarts like Google and Facebook. Now, we see regulators and lawmakers bringing new antitrust arguments against big tech companies. We've just seen Amazon in the crosshairs, as D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine alleges that an Amazon policy that prohibits sellers from offering their products at a lower price on other websites is anti-competitive. And in December, we saw the FTC and 48 states sue Facebook over whether it crushed competition by essentially buying rivals like Instagram and WhatsApp. We've also got the Justice Department and more than a dozen state attorneys general investigating Google over how it operates its dominant search and ads businesses. And we've got Epic Games, which sued Apple over its App Store practices. That trial even put its two CEOs on the stand. In all of these antitrust cases, there's the issue of control over prices, fees, mergers and acquisitions, and whether big tech companies are exerting it fairly. The decisions in these ongoing cases could set real precedents that reverberate beyond the technology industry. So Silicon Valley and all of the business community is watching closely for the outcome. The future of the global economy will depend on it.
That was Bloomberg Senior Executive Editor for Global Technology, Brad Stone. Welcome back to a Bloomberg Special Report, U.S. and Big Tech. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. U.S. tech contributes mightily to the global economy. Microsoft reported it had more than 100,000 employees in the U.S. at the end of the first quarter. That's the same time Facebook reported more than 60,000 workers, up 26% since last year. And then there's Apple. The company says it employs 80,000 people. But if you add US-based suppliers and those in the App Store ecosystem, Apple says it's responsible for 2 million jobs across 50 states. Silicon Valley has no doubt contributed to California's current $3 trillion GDP. And with Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft continuing to close deals, big tech's economic contribution isn't lost on California Attorney General Rob Bonta. I recently asked him if big in itself is bad.
When you're big and you're powerful, then there is the potential for overreach, for violation of the law, for doing things that's not consistent with what's best for consumers. So it deserves a close look. It deserves scrutiny from my office, from the California Attorney General. Look, these are homegrown companies. We're proud of what we've accomplished in California. 5th largest economy in the world. We're adding 100,000 jobs, periodically, regularly to our economy as we roar back. But you need to act responsibly. You need to follow the rules. You need to follow the law. And we've seen indications. I mean, we just look at the facts that suggest that it might not be happening here or that it's not happening here. And so our job is to step in and make sure the law is followed.
How has tech avoided scrutiny for so long?
I think there's a lag period. We're using old models and applying it to innovative, brand new models and tech approaches and innovation, where the old model of addressing monopolies and anti-competitive practices might not fit. A lot of the old models are based on price. A lot of the products that tech companies provide are free. And so, and when you look at some of the approaches that the federal government is putting forward for consideration as legislation, it's not based on the price-based model. It's based on maybe making sure that a company like Facebook isn't allowed to purchase all of the competition and gobble it up, or making sure that you can take your privacy and all of your information that you put into one product and move it to another if that's your choice, and not feel like you're locked in to one product forevermore.
Most tech companies seem to acknowledge the need for some kind of regulation. Microsoft President Brad Smith captured the mood of the moment from big tech's perspective.
I think we're in the relatively early stages of a broad conversation. You do see more concerns about the power of tech companies, ourselves included. People want to know what's the right balance between encouraging innovation and imposing more responsibility under the law. We're seeing this in Washington, we're seeing it in Brussels, we're seeing it around the world. I think in many ways where this is going is a particular focus on technology platforms that serve as gatekeepers. In other words, they not only serve as a platform like an operating system, but people need to go through them to sell their commerce, whether it's a product that's on Amazon or an app, say in the Apple App Store, or through a service like Google Search. And I think that's where we're going to see more and more government focus. That's where we're seeing a lot of the antitrust focus by states in the United States, especially when it gets connected to digital advertising. And I don't know what it will bring. I think it's too early to know. But you do see more of a common conversation around an agreed upon set of problems that people are trying to solve.
Coming up on Red Lines, U.S. and big tech, potential solutions and scenarios. Plus, there's a new sheriff in town. In June, Lena Khan was sworn in as the chair of the Federal Trade Commission. What her ascension means for big tech. As we go to break, more of what Silicon Valley makes of regulation. This is Bloomberg.
I actually believe in my heart of hearts that the government restricting Microsoft's ability to leverage their way through the browser opened the door for Facebook, Google, Amazon.
I'm a strong opponent to the breakup because I do think, just as I described, we're in globally competition, and you want our competitors to be strong. It isn't just a question of what happens within the U.S.
I think you have to look company by company what the technology companies are doing, and are they creating the most good in society, or has the downsides gotten too large?
This is a market that, over the past few weeks, has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Let's take it for granted that Google is a natural monopoly. There's nothing wrong with it, as you know.
So Google is a monopoly?
Well, Google has more than 90% market share. By definition, it's a monopoly with a small m. That's fine.
That was Greylock partner Sridhar Ramaswamy, a former Google executive who oversaw all of Google's ad products, including search, display, and video. By the end of his 15 years at Google, the advertising arm was worth $115 billion. He's since left to start a Google competitor, the first ads-free subscription search engine, Neva. From former executives to shareholders, can meaningful change at big tech companies occur from within? I asked Arjuna Capital's Natasha Lamb, who presses tech companies to be more transparent as an activist investor, including Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Amazon.
Where we are today, because Facebook and other tech companies really haven't kept their houses in order. They've made a mess, and now you're seeing Congress and the FTC and the AGs coming in and trying to clean it up with the tools at their disposal. It's not surprising that they're coming to whether it's Amazon on price controls, but even Facebook on the power and the control of mind share. If Facebook isn't going to clean their room, then the grown-ups are going to come in and do it.
One of those grown-ups is the very young Lina Khan, big tech critic, now the chair of the Federal Trade Commission. At just 32 years old, Lina Khan took the helm of the FTC, setting the stage for a showdown between Washington and Silicon Valley. Khan is one of the most outspoken critics of big tech, which she says has gotten too big and should face tough questions about its power and impact on democracy. Before the FTC, she served as a Columbia Law Antitrust Associate Professor and an advisor to the House Judiciary Subcommittee taking on antitrust issues. Khan is perhaps best known for her award-winning article titled Amazon's Antitrust Paradox, calling for greater scrutiny on the e-commerce giant. All eyes are now on how she puts her views of big tech's so-called monopolistic practices to work. I recently sat down with renowned antitrust attorney and Stanford law professor Mark Lemley, who described what the tech sector could be in for under Khan's tenure.
Well, I think that's definitely a further signal that the tech industries are in for some rough sledding on the antitrust front. Commissioner Khan is someone who's been quite vocal in her desire to rein in big tech, with an early focus on Amazon, but also a discussion of this idea of platforms and structural separation between the platform aspects and other aspects of a company's business. So I think she's going to be someone who pushes for aggressive antitrust enforcement in this industry. It also means that the Democrats, we now have an FTC at full strength, and there are 3 Democrats on the commission. So a number of cases in which the commission might otherwise have deadlocked, as it's done a couple of times in recent months, are cases where the commission is likely to take a more aggressive enforcement strategy.
As for what regulation and enforcement awaits all of these tech giants, it's anyone's guess. But one thing's for certain, the microscope is now fixated on the size of these companies, how fast they scale, and how much power they wield. Time will tell if long-standing anti-monopoly approaches will work, or if new strategies are needed to disrupt the disruptors. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Thanks for joining this Bloomberg Special Report, Red Lines, U.S. and Big Tech.
Bloomberg surveillance puts global markets into perspective.
We're going to try to fold an economic theory here with what we've got.
Based on data.
The focus is going to be on the data, the manufacturing data.
How the market responds will be really interesting.
Timely conversations.
Part of getting out of this hole is big fiscal.
Keeping you up to date on trends.
When do you take this thing off?
So you put it on to take it back off.
Wake up with Tom Keene, Jonathan Ferro, and Lisa Abramowitz. Weekday mornings on Bloomberg Television.